Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the webinar, the Tax Administration Assessment Tool, Assessment for Reform, with reflections on lessons learned from World Bank experience. Thank you very much all to connect. On behalf of the Global Tax Program Secretariat, partners, development partners, we are delighted to have you all connected today. This webinar is transmitted live to World Bank staff and through YouTube to a wider audience. My name is Daniel Alvarez. I'm a senior public sector specialist at the World Bank. And I am very glad to welcome you all to this seminar. Chiara Bronchi, our practice manager for the Fiscal Policy and Sustainable Growth, will soon connect. She's having some connection issues, but in any event, I'm very happy to welcome you all to this event. With over 110 assessments worldwide in more than 80 jurisdictions during a span of 8 years, TADAT has consolidated as a trust and instrumental diagnostic tool in support of tax administration reform. Ever since its early design stages, the World Bank has been an active technical partner and a sponsor organization of TADAT global missions in different capacities, including leading or participating in 31 assessment missions worldwide, participation in the technical assistance group, and on a number of training and outreach activities. As we transit one of the most pressing and economic times in modern history for fiscal and tax policy makers worldwide, a space of reflection is needed for lessons learned from the TADAT mission. It will allow us to better adapt the assessment tool to emerging challenges posed not only by the global pandemic, but also by other critical emerging challenges faced by tax administrators, such as fairness and income inequality, the digital economy, gender for development, and a new international tax framework. Despite some progress, about half of low-income and lower-income countries collect less than 15% of taxes in GDP. To attain the Sustainable Development Goals and put the economy on a higher economic growth path in the mid and long terms, while addressing the COVID-19 crisis in the short term, a comprehensive tax reform is at the core of the strategy to overcome such tax GDP development tipping point. Successful tax reforms start with a sound assessment. Over time, TADAT has been providing the generally accepted framework for the assessment of tax administration performance as a reform gateway. So thank you very much for connecting today to this panel. We will ask Mr. Jim Brumby, who is the representative of the World Bank to the TADAT Steering Committee, if he can kindly address some welcoming and some additional remarks from the World Bank experience. Thanks. Over to you, Jim. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I assume you can hear me because you're not looking confused. Well, greetings, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me to say a few words. It's really a great pleasure to be here with so many TADAT luminaries. The expenditure sibling to TADAT, PIFA, was about 10 years old when stakeholders began to coalesce around the idea that something similar would be really valuable on the tax administration side. After a couple of efforts, really, to get going, by 2013, the fund, with the bank and development partners, established the Tax Administration Diagnostic Assessment Trust Fund to support the new instrument. And with 7 bilateral partners, and with the fund and the bank with their hands on the steering wheel, TADAT has really become, I think, an important part of the capacity building effort across developing and emerging countries. And as Daniel alluded to, the timing has been excellent. Tax has truly emerged as a very important development issue, with increasing recognition not only for tax's role in funding needed expenditures, but also its role as part of a country's social capital. TADAT, I think, contributes to this wider agenda of the international community to help countries strengthen tax revenues, to better mobilise domestic revenue around such goals, as Daniel mentioned, as the SDGs, but also to promote shared prosperity and give substance to the idea of a social contract. While, TADAT in many ways sort of closely modelled PIFA, it also had some differences. So one thing I think which it did very well is it has modelled a very similar governance environment, which is a very collaborative, very sort of learning-oriented governance environment. But it's also done some things quite differently. The steering committee meetings are much, much briefer, much quicker, much swifter, some may say more efficient on the revenue side than on the expenditure side. And I think one of the other very important differences is that TADAT has used this system of accredited training TADAT assessors. So there are now more than 500 worldwide accredited TADAT assessors. The midterm evaluation, which was undertaken on TADAT in 2018, concluded that TADAT had become a tool that was truly fit for purpose. Countries' feedback was that TADAT was very relevant for tax administrations, as you'd hope, and that was also very relevant to development partners in designing programs of support for tax reforms. I think the evaluation did a good job of bringing forward many examples of where TADAT had produced desired impact on, in terms of reform efforts on tax administration. And we look forward to the current evaluation, which is now being undertaken, which should be completed during the middle of next calendar year. I think today's webinar really gives a good opportunity to highlight some of the examples that may be relevant to evaluators, drawing from the bank's experience working on TADAT. And I think picking up another theme from Daniel's few comments at the start, like PIFA, TADAT has shown an ability to adapt and to learn as it goes. And this actually, having sat on both the steering committees, this actually becomes a bit of a dilemma, that you want the continuity of evaluative effort, but you also have to adapt or evolve the instrument to take account of changing circumstances. So one of the things I think that TADAT did was release the new version of the field guide in 2019, which included the idea of ISO-based risk management framework. That risk management framework, of course, puts a heavy emphasis on the capabilities that have been necessary in the COVID pandemic. So as a feature for COVID, this ISO framework has been especially important. Business continuity, of course, has been tested in ways that would have been very, very difficult to have foreseen. From the 113 assessments now that have been conducted according to today's website in more than 80 jurisdictions, one of the other key trends has been the use in a slightly adapted form of TADAT at subnational levels. This is also something that happened with PIFA after a while, but I think TADAT has now been used more than 20 times at subnational levels. And the other aspect, which is an important part of the emerging use of TADAT, is in its use as a repeat assessment. So the value, of course, of repeat assessment is it gives you a timeline of change. So if the focus is on the delta of tax reform, it is a very good way of measuring that delta. Feedback suggests that TADAT training of tax officials has proven an especially valuable feature, not only in terms of preparing towards a TADAT assessment and the professional accreditation that goes with it, but equally important as an opportunity to share across good international best practice. It also subjects, of course, the tool to an ongoing source of questioning and challenging, which is also very valuable. Moving forward, TADAT will have to adapt, as Daniel alluded, to issues around the digital economy, around the IT sector, green taxation, tax equity, fairness, increasing interest, for instance, in wealth taxation, and matters that were not talked about several years ago, perhaps they should have been, such as gender imbalances in the way that tax administration is implemented. I think space also lies ahead in terms of making better use of the data that is created en masse, if you like, from TADAT assessments. This has proven very valuable on the expenditure side, with PIFA data fueling and feeding into many papers around the effort on public financial management reform. I think it's also important to recognise that TADAT is an important instrument of accountability. It details how the development partners, such as the bank and the fund, view tax administration, so it makes us more accountable for the nature of our advice and for our operations. It also provides an avenue for countries to be more transparent about their tax admin challenges. I think we would like to see more TADAT reports become public. Personally, I don't think it's all that surprising that TADATs are less commonly made public than their PIFA counterparts, but hopefully as the numbers grow within jurisdictions, so across the subnationals, and through repeat assessments, countries will become more comfortable with the idea of making their TADAT assessments public. Let me now just very briefly turn to the bank's participation in the TADAT mission. We're very much an active partner in TADAT. In its gestation and since we have been engaged in TADAT. Our management and technical teams have participated in the steering committee and also in the technical assistance group. To date, the bank has participated in 31 assessments, either leading or participating, so less than a third, a little less than a third of the total. There are assessments ongoing at the moment in the bank, for instance, in Brazil, in Rio Grande do Sul, and others are in the pipeline, such as Uruguay. And TADAT assessments have fed into many pipelines of technical assistance and operations. For instance, informing prior actions and the dialogue around DPOs, P4Rs, and IPFs. I think for many of the TA packages, TADAT has really formed a very important foundation for that work. World Bank participation or representation of the Technical Assistance Group has been instrumental in different ways, including the following: in providing technical advice during consultation phases of the TADAT framework's refinement and design of the framework, in peer reviewing of assessments led by other agencies, and participating in outreach activities such as in-country or online certification. While most TADAT assessments have been funded by country lending program and operations, I think it is useful to recognise the role that the global tax program has played and the window has played as being quite fundamental to getting TADAT rolling well in the bank. For example, the two ongoing TADAT implementation projects I just mentioned, funded by the Global Tax Program provide the team with needed flexibility to strengthen the bank's footprint into more national and subnational assessments, which otherwise may not have occurred. And it's also been instrumental, I think, to assist in strengthening or enhancing the dialogue between the global tax team, which is global in orientation, as its name suggests, and banks' country teams, as well as the TADAT Secretariat, making that distance shorter, and donor partners, as well as the international tax community. I think moving forward, the World Bank TADAT team will support TADAT across many country teams and also across other GPs. This will mean increasing the offer of in-house training for TADAT. A critical mass of in-house accredited TADAT assessors is necessary for the bank to increase its rollout of TADAT across countries where relevant, and for us to increase also the knowledge of our staff about best and emerging practices in tax administration. So I encourage more accreditation amongst bank staff. And I'd have to say that I think TADAT accreditation also looks very good on a resume. So with that, let me pass back to you and let's get on with the webinar. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Jim, for your insightful remarks about World Bank participation in the TADAT mission and the challenge ahead. So let me now introduce Mr. Justin Sake. He's the head of the TADAT Secretariat at the International Monetary Fund. Justin will deliver the keynote presentation of this event entitled TADAT in Context, Summary of Results and Observations to Date. Thanks, Justin, for participating in this webinar, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I'll be sharing my screen. I hope you can see it, or it's coming up. And thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar to share some thoughts about TADAT and our own observations. Thank you for the opening remarks, both Daniel and Jim. And Jim has touched on a number of aspects that TADAT is already working on. The evolution of the field guide itself from 2015 version to 2019, taking into account experiences out in the field, and also taking note of emerging issues, digitalization, gender, green issues, and the TADAT is keeping abreast with these particular developments. The presentation has lots of material to be shared with you after the webinar, and I'm just going to ad-lib it. So if I don't dwell too much on a particular slide, bear with me, it will be given to you. I'm just going to do a quick recap of TADAT very briefly, look at the TADAT results to date, and then also share with you some TADAT impacts and lessons. There are actually very many, but I'll try and summarize them as best as possible, and some conclusions that are coming through. First, again, to reiterate the thanks to the bank and other partners for the strong support and relationship with the TADAT framework, guidance in the steering committee and the technical advisory group, all are absolutely valued. And I can say that the 2019 field guide is extremely stable right now, and all the guidance and the ideas that have come through, both from the steering committee and the technical advisory group and the wider community, have been invaluable. I also have found the flexibility and lending and leading and funding to that training and assessments under the GTP to be very, very strong. The working relationship is very, very strong with all partners. And here I can actually brag that I think TADAT has gone further into collaboration with the assessment team members being mixed, and we are all sharing ideas even during assessments themselves, whether, as in the past, was in country or now hybrid, both virtually and then with people on the ground. And also to recognize, and this is a very big area, growing area at the subnational level, that the bank has played a significant role. Assessments at the subnational level in Kaduna, Kano, Jigawa, and this was together with the FCDO, or formerly DFID, at the state level in Brazil, collaboration with the Inter-American Development Bank and SECO and other partners, very, very strong. We also realize, and this is something to note, that many development partners are gravitating towards support at the subnational level. For example, we are working very, very closely now with the United Nations Capital Development Fund in the East Africa region, and now in DR Congo. I'm aware that the bank is also developing a subnational program, or if it hasn't developed it already, for DR Congo. And the collaboration with United Nations Capital Development Fund is extremely critical. We are in the middle of it, and we are working with both parties. But let me also say that the journey is just starting, because whether it's developed or developing tax administrations, there's a lot to do, as I'll show you, very soon. So it doesn't matter whether the tax administration is developed or developing, there are areas of concern. And I'll give you an example. We did, with the Canada Revenue Agency, some kind of internal benchmarking. We guided them in the TADAT framework, and they didn't score all A's or B's or C's. They had a couple of D's, and they acknowledged this. And very openly, they came out and said they were working better in silos, but not horizontally across the whole institution. And they wanted to strive and work much better horizontally. So the journey is just starting, and the bank's involvement is extremely important, as is for the other partners in identifying, sponsoring, and relating to the technical work related to the TADAT framework. One other issue that we are observing lately, and we've had a discussion with the EU on this during their seminars. They've also been inviting the TADAT Secretariat to provide guidance and observations on what has happened on the TADAT front. It's extremely important for the tax administration officials to know why they're collecting taxes. And yes, easy to say that, yes, to support government in financing public goods and services, but there must be an anchor point. SDGs are a very good focus, and I think this should be emphasized more. Why are you collecting? Yes, public goods and services, but what are you aspiring to globally or more holistically? So that's an issue that we are observing and needs to be taken into account. TADAT, Jim has explained what TADAT is and the TADAT framework, 9 performance outcome areas, and then the measurement framework that was adopted from PIFA. It has worked very well for us, and also relating PIFA to the TADAT at any one point in time. Those are the 9 performance outcome areas: registration of taxpayers, risk management issues, as Jim has indicated, aligning this through the ISO framework, voluntary compliance, timely filing and payments, and accuracy in the declarations. All these are pertinent issues. So when you're engaging in discussions with government or government officials, it's very important to have this at the back of your mind. What are we looking at as the key functions or outcomes that we expect from a tax or revenue administration? And when I say revenue administration, some customs agencies have actually adopted the TADAT framework, those areas that are pertinent to them. For example, risk management is generally, it's a general thing that's used across customs, and customs has been at risk management much longer than the tax side, supporting voluntary compliance, issues of timely declarations and payment. So there are commonalities in there that some customs agencies have actually picked up. Most important, establishing the baseline of strengths and weaknesses, or in the latter case, areas that need development. Where do you start? You need to prioritize and implement these reform interventions in line with proven good practices. And then monitoring performance. A number of tax administrations are now embedding the TADAT framework in their regular performance management frameworks. And this is extremely encouraging. And I know, not that I come from Uganda, but I know that the Uganda Revenue Authority on a monthly basis reviews how they're performing against the TADAT metrics. In Kenya, Kenya Revenue Authority has appointed a focal person on TADAT to ensure that all things TADAT are a go. We've been discussing with them more recently on how they can train tax administration officials. And as Jim said, not just to prepare for assessments, but creating reform champions at that level. I also have indications, and as Jim has mentioned, that many people are now showing the TADAT training or certification on the curriculum vitae, and that is growing. I know some who call themselves senior TADAT specialists, but all those have gone through the training, and it's extremely important to create that cadre of officials who are champions of TADAT. And then obviously, once you monitor, it's hoped that you will take corrective or remedial action. That's the TADAT hierarchy, which I'll not dwell on too. When you get the handouts, you'll be able to have a look at it. What are we seeing? It's interesting, but also a little bit concerning in terms of the work that still needs to be done. 85 countries have been assessed yesterday, and 86th was completed next week. That was St. Lucia. Next week, we expect Moldova, sorry, not Moldova. We expect another country, Cote d'Ivoire, to be completed sometime next week. So it will be 87 by the end of this month, and there are more that are coming. Requests are coming in from Lesotho, from Serbia, Moldova, and a lot of repeat assessments as well. And as Daniel and Jim indicated, involvement of the World Bank in this whole exercise to know where we are, take stock, and then see what we can do in order to improve or strengthen those particular areas that need strengthening. But what is interesting, initially there was a thought that that is only for low-income countries. But we find very, very clearly that from an income classification point of view, the upper middle income countries and lower middle income countries are really taking the center stage in this regard. Not to say that the low income countries do not have assessments, which is the 24 as you can see in there, but that group is absolutely important, and they have found a lot of value in it. You'll also see that in terms of region, Africa, 53 takes the bulk of them, not surprising, because even when we look at the persons trained in the TADAT methodology, Africa tops it, okay? Others are coming through, and I'm glad that we're working with the Asian Development Bank and the EU in the background in order to increase the footprint in Asia-Pacific region. And also, we are now working closely with the VAT Institute in Abu Dhabi because they want to spread the message across the Middle East and Central Asia countries. So that is absolutely encouraging. I should also say that recently the Asian Development Bank led a mission to Pakistan, and the World Bank was involved because this is the partnership, the World Bank, FCDO of the UK, and other partners. I mean, this is really good to see, the Fiscal Affairs Department of the IMF. And this morning, I got an indication, a confirmation that the Pakistan tax authorities would want the performance assessment report published. So publication is increasing. It has its own issues, but we are realizing that when people get the second assessment, they're more confident in publishing. We'll be getting one from Jamaica very soon as well. The reason why I said that we still have a lot of work to do we are looking at the assessment scores, the quality of assessment scores across the globe. And we find for the 115 assessments, we still have a long way to go. I mean, only 18% of the scoring by all the assessors exhibit good tax administration practice or exceed. And then the good is 14, but the fundamentals, 21%. But I usually combine the fundamentals with where the fundamentals are not even in place. So 47 globally plus the 21, that is 68%. Now, if you're 68% not doing well, health-wise, then we have a problem. And again, you know, Sub-Saharan Africa, there's a lot of work to do. That is 78%. You know, we still have a lot of work to be done. Asia Pacific region, the few that have been assessed so far, there's also 67%. EUR, that's Europe, we still have pockets there, you know, 54%. Middle East and Central Asia, a little bit more, and 59%. So this is the pattern, you know. The Western Hemisphere, where we have some high-income countries that have done assessments, they still have issues as well. So, broadly speaking, whichever income level you're at, there are concerns. And here you will see that those high-income countries that have been assessed, I mean, they have issues 44%, they've had issues 44% of the time. It's improving over time, but that's an issue. So, TADAT is truly global. And it's very important for us to take that in. As I said, Canada did not get all A's or B's, it got some D's, and it's rectifying. Spain as well, Greece as well. So TADAT is global and it is working. Now, very quickly, I'm going to tell you where the key challenges are, what we have observed, and we'll look at, when we get the questions back, we can elaborate a little bit more. Data quality and data quality and data quality. And also observing that many institutions are still working in silos. The left hand may not know very well what the right hand is doing. And if we are talking about teamwork and a holistic view of tax administration, silos are rife. I'd like to emphasize that silos are rife. And TADAT brings about that realization when an evaluation, an assessment, whether internal benchmarking or external, you know, supported assessments come in, they see these silos glaringly. Jim talked about business continuity. So this will be shared with you, but business continuity, when we did the TADAT assessments pre-COVID, it was very, very clear that many of the assessed countries and entities were struggling with risk management, institutional risk management. We put that on the table, but it was taken more seriously after COVID hit. So that's something that's coming out. Data quality, siloed working, business continuity issues, that's risk management generally. And we talk about refunds, adequacy of the VAT refund system, and timeliness of the refunds. Those are still issues. And this has also been featured in the general updates that we provide to the G20 finance ministers and governors every single year. So there are 20 hotspots. I just wanted to highlight them. Some of you may actually relate to these when you're talking with the authorities. But all these should be looked at not individually or in silos, but collectively. What do we do? There's a lot of work to do. Some general impacts that we see as the TADAT Secretariat and through the quality assurance of all the performance assessment reports and closely interacting with countries now, especially on the training side. When TADAT started, it was not thought that training would be a very big issue. It is a very big issue now because countries are saying, before you come to assess me, I want to know, what am I dealing with? So that we can interact, you know, creatively and collaboratively. So that's one. Two, as I mentioned earlier, developing champions, reform champions. If somebody knows what has to be done, they will be more amenable, to doing it, and in a measured way, in a collaborative way. I remember in Uganda Revenue Authority when the Commissioner General said, if I know TADAT and my staff do not know TADAT or good practices, replace TADAT with good practices, then we have not even started fighting the battle. So lots of training was done, and in the Uganda Revenue Authority itself, over 400 persons have been trained to date. Globally, we have over 4,000 that have been trained, but that's important to create those champions. And some of the reforms that have been going on, and this is a survey we did in May 2019, we're updating it, is more in the area of processes and procedures. What worried me on this issue is we're looking at roles and responsibilities as well. If we are reforming processes and procedures without nailing down the roles and responsibilities, then we have a lot more work to do. So in certain areas, yes, on the supporting voluntary compliance, so that's customer service and so on. But this gives you a general pattern of what is happening out there. And in my my role as the head of the TADAT Secretariat over the last 7 years, even what I've shown you as the scoring hasn't changed much. We still have the 46, 47, no fundamentals in place. Then the 20 somethings, in fundamentals in place. That's a comfort zone, which we need to get people out of. What we also see as well, that where repeat assessments are taking place or have taken place, we have done 9, but we see requests. Cote d'Ivoire is going to be completed next week. So that will be the 10th. Then Serbia has requested. Moldova has requested as well. We see improvements. And I'll just take one example by income classification. And these are all the 115 assessments that have been done by the end of October. For low-income countries, and the bands are A, B, C, and D, and those are the score ranges. So anything 1 to 2 is really at a D level. And you can see that the low-income countries are generally graduating into the C level. Fundamentals, more fundamentals are in place, okay? And that's very, very useful. Lower middle-income countries are also graduating. Upper middle-income countries, yes, a bit better, but we need to see much better performance. And you can compare that by geographical region as well. In Western Hemisphere, those are the Americas and the Caribbean. At first assessment, they're at a C level. They're graduating, progressively moving towards, a B level, which is a much better practice. But again, Sub-Saharan Africa, graduating more from fundamentals not in place to some fundamentals, more fundamentals being in place and working towards better performance. Yes, there are areas that are still tough, and this is where a lot of support needs to go. The taxpayer registers, this is really the fundamental. This is the portfolio that the tax administrations are managing. If you don't know what you're managing, I always ask, then tell me what you're managing. And that's the taxpayer register. That's your portfolio. You need to know what you're managing, the accuracy of it, so that you can manage better, because the registered taxpayer base is the basis for everything else. It goes into risk management. If you have a poor registration, portfolio, your risk management results, you need to start from somewhere, but they will not be as good as you expect. Payment of taxes, tracing taxpayers, dispute resolution, is also an issue. And then accountability and transparency. This is the ethics and integrity side. And I'd like to applaud the World Bank, Jim in particular. At one steering committee meeting, one of the findings of the TADAT assessment was these suspense accounts where taxpayers pay, but either the tax heads are not allocated to those payments, and then a suspense account is created. And Jim promised to take this up. We'll hear from him on this later on. But suspense accounts are a recipe for corrupt practices. Other impacts very, very quickly. Analytical work. Jim mentioned the issue of using the data more. So TADAT Secretariat gives updates in progress reports, and the references are there. Authors are actually using the results. Of course, due to disclosure issues, some has to be sanitized, but general patterns can be drawn. We now should have about 32 performance assessment reports published on our website, and more are coming. The World Bank, through Anne Brockmeyer and others, did something on Costa Rica. We released, because we saw taxpayer registration as a key concern, one of our colleagues in the TADAT Secretariat, Maimbo Nyanga, also produced a paper on taxpayer registration insights. It's also posted on the TADAT website. We are working with the African Tax Administration Forum on a paper that's actually becoming very interesting, using TADAT results, but through guidance from various reviewers, we are now adding the issue of tax capacity. And the results that I've seen so far say whether you have high or low tax capacity, there are issues in terms of performance on the tax administration side that one needs to deal with. And then we've been using machine learning, and we have some preliminary results. But what we are now doing, we've set up a team, especially officials from certain tax administrations, to test the results so that when the paper comes out, it is more holistic and has been tested on the ground. I must say that results are actually encouraging. We do outreach, like now, this webinar is broadcast live. We have that podcast, and we are dealing with key issues. More recently, we're dealing with inspirations by TADAT for the Inland Revenue Service of India. They have not done assessments, but they've got TADAT training, and they're using that knowledge in order to enhance. It included issues of GovTech or digitalization, and also from the field, from the lab to the field, a series which is running where the International Center for Taxation and Development has been doing some lab results, lab testing, and took it to the field to Rwanda. That has also been broadcast live. And then really giving room for beneficiaries of TADAT assessments or TADAT knowledge to showcase themselves. This has worked very, very well. I can say very proudly that the private sector is noticing as well. The other day I was looking at the live, the live cast we've done, and KPMG Australia, Deloitte, Data Talk. Now, Data Talk is an IT company, and we are now working with Bearing Point Caribbean and guiding them into developing a dashboard where, as a ready reckoner, TADAT at a glance, the tax administration commissioner, commissioner general can see what's going on, just using the databases that they have. Now, I'd like to just read through what Catherine Baer said in terms of TADAT, partnerships with others, and then delivering on its mandate despite COVID. We actually, changed approach, adapted approach very, very, very fast. And we did TADAT training in Paraguay as the first in COVID training virtually, very well received. And the TADAT Secretariat staffers really worked very hard. Mentioning Jimena Arcido, who took the lead in this regard. And Catherine reflected, she led the first virtual TADAT assessment to Colombia and then eventually to Brazil. Criticality of training, Jim mentioned that. Collaboration, value the different perspectives. An assessment that avoids duplication of effort. It's also more efficient use of country's time. In-country presence, Because when you're doing hybrid, it's good. TADAT evaluates the evidence. It's evidence-based. So we need people on the ground. The persons that we have trained in country are now supporting that whole process. And in this instance, the Inter-American Development Bank, and Monica will talk about this a bit later, I'm sure, had an economist, in Colombia, who was closer to the day-to-day operations of tax administration and helped the whole process. And again, innovation. The TADAT Secretariat, through support from the steering committee, technical advisory group, and other stakeholders, including countries, has been innovating quite a lot. Do not be afraid of trying new ways of doing things. And then for those countries that don't have a presence, either of the World Bank, you don't have a program with them and so on, TADAT has been one way of getting in there. Mauritius is one case in point. Brazil as well. No program with the IMF, but TADAT has been used, to get in there and take stock. And now Brazil will be getting technical assistance from the bank, that's from the fund and others as well. Now, there are many of these, so I'm just going to conclude as follows. The rest you can read up when the presentation is shared. There's immediate value into that. Immediate value. It's a standardized approach, and it enables a holistic view of what it takes to manage a tax administration. And some stakeholders who are not even TADAT assessors have taken this concept and said, if tax administration can have standards, what about other operations in public service? I'll leave that one there. There's potential value as well. Identifying health status, establishing reform baselines. We've talked about that. Working out remedial actions. And at the end of the day, once you know that things are moving rather well and you're monitoring them well, it's less stressful as a tax administration official or as a chief executive of tax administration. We have applied the TADAT value, as you can see, 115 assessments now, 21 at the subnational level, and more are coming. There's also realized value, input into reform programs, and the lessons were used to fine-tune, as Jim says, the 2015 field guide to the 2019 guide. And then the transformation looking forward. Where are we going? Where should we be? Broader support to DRM and SDGs, and then business intelligence and analytics. Artificial intelligence. The TADAT Secretariat has already started using artificial intelligence, and some of the podcasts that have been released in the last 3 weeks or so actually have used artificial intelligence to voice over. And then obviously transformative value is looking at enhanced service to taxpayers. So I'm going to stop there, and I'd like to thank you very, very much, and back to Daniel. Thank you.
So good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me. And thank you, Justin. I want to thank Justin, Danielle for taking over from me, and Jim. So Justin, thank you for a great overview of the TADAT. I thought at least a couple of points I would like to take away. First of all is that there is still a lot to do, but we see some performance improvements, first of all, I think from the overview, and that is certainly a point that I would say is thanks to the collaboration around this methodology. The other is that I think it's very encouraging to see that TADAT methodology is becoming internalized, if I may say that. And so is now starting to be really well understood by tax administrations around the world. And we see an increasing demand of TADAT assessments or repeating TADAT assessments, not only in low-income countries that were the original targets of this methodology, but also advanced economies as well as emerging economies. So it's definitely a testimony to the fact that the methodology is valid and is definitely worth investing and continue to invest in it collectively, all of us together. I think it was also your last points on the various streams and innovations that TADAT is also encouraging in an intent of improving tax administration performance. And so wherever it's possible, also encouraging innovation using technology, etc. So I really look forward to this discussion today. I'm really sorry for before. I had a complete blackout. Where I am right now, the weather is really bad and not even my World Bank phone was working. But I look forward to the discussions today. We will hear very interesting examples and also to continue this collaboration with the fund, with the UN and also the EU and all the members of the TADAT Secretariat. And now let me hand over to Daniel Alvarez Estrada. I think you have already met him earlier this morning, and he will be the moderator of panel 1 on TADAT and the World Bank reflections on the bank's role and contribution to the TADAT mission. Thank you, Justin, and over to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Chiara. Thank you very much. So let me, all of you, welcome to the first panel of this webinar, in which our panelists will reflect on the World Bank's role and contribution to the TADAT mission and how TADAT has been used internally for operational purposes. So let me introduce you to the panelists. So we have Mr. Tuan Minh Le, who's a leading economist from the Eastern and Southern Africa region from the Macroeconomics, Trade and Investment Global Practice from the World Bank. We have Ms. Natalia Bliecka, who is a senior public sector specialist at the Middle East and North Africa region, MENA, from the Governance Global Practice. And then we have Mr. Saidou Diop, who's senior public sector specialist at the Western and Central Africa from the Governance Global Practice. So thank you very much, colleagues, for making yourself available to this panel. So let me start, Tuan, with you, if it's okay. So Tuan, let me go back to 2013, when TADAT was first on its initial stage of design. You were part of that team from the bank side. And I would like to hear about your experience as a bank team engaged on initial discussions to produce the very first draft of the TADAT framework, along with colleagues from the IMF. And also, Tuan, I would like to hear about your in terms of your wide experience as tax economist at the bank. How has been TADAT instrumental to inform our operations in support of tax reform? Over to you, Tuan.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Your question has really brought back to me the memories of the time that three of us, you, Natalia, and myself, we represented and led the bank side working together with the IMF colleagues, the Fiscal Affairs Department particularly, from the very early days, the initial stages of conceptualization, the design, initial piloting of the TADAT. Yeah, let me break down your question into three parts, and I would like to mention structure that in three parts. So one, I would like to recount on our experience in engagement and the tool development process, and then I move on to talk a little bit about what motivated us to work together with IMF and also other development partners in this important endeavor. And then I could conclude with to address the last part of your question of the application and the usefulness of the TADAT in our operation. So first, let me get into our engagement throughout the tool development process. Yeah, as it was alluded early on by Jim, that the bank team, Jim was our supervisor at the time directly on the development process. And we enjoy, as alluded by him, that we enjoy the process, this important undertaking as a technical partner and the sponsor of the tool, while the IMF, the FAD was taking the lead. And personally, it was my great pleasure. It was my great experience working with like a leading tech experts at the FAD, initially with Juan Toro, Peter Behrend, Graham Harrison, and others. And then from the piloting stage on, we worked together with Justin Jack, our keynote speaker today, and the head of the TADAT Secretariat. So it was a really great experience. And in those early days, we and our IMF colleagues really engaged, collaborated, worked together side by side, almost on daily basis, of course, except the weekends. And in attentive brainstorming on like the structure, the framework, how to define the performance outcome in the areas, the POAs, the high-level indicators, the dimensions for each of the POAs. And we spend big chunk of time to go through options, what to be added, what to be measured, and what benchmark to be used for the scoring. And it sounds simple, but it was really taking a lot of time for us, you know, to really deliberate on. And from the bank side, our hands-on experience in revenue administration, technical assistance, and lending projects was really instrumental in supporting us to sort out and weigh in the options selection, especially to reconcile the various practices on the ground and the best practice reference for each dimension scoring. Especially, I mentioned here two areas. One is the areas of the VAT refund. That is a part of the POA 8, performance outcome in the areas 8, efficient revenue management. This is a really commonly observed bottleneck in implementing the VAT. And it's related to both sides of the effective enforcement against fraud and delayed refund processing. And the other, that is really the landscape and outlay of the POA 9 on accountability and transparency. That is really directly linked up with our experience in designing the World Bank revenue investment lending operations to revamp like the functions of the internal audit, to facilitate the wider stakeholders' participation, and to conduct the perception surveys from both sides, the tax administration officials and the taxpayers. And subsequent to the tool development stage, we and our IMF colleagues have collectively moved on to strategize on country piloting and refining the tool. And at this stage, other DPs, development partners, and regional tax organizations have come in, actively joined with substantial support and contributions. And second, I briefly talk about like, why we, what motivates us to get into this, because that is always the question why we do this. And that is also in the mind of our colleagues from the other side that, Justin and other colleagues. What's the stake in there for our doing this? At the bank, we have invested billions and billions of dollars in revenue reforms over decades. And we did experience firsthand the cliche or the saying that, oh, tax reforms are highly risky, they are very costly, and they are long-term in nature. And we understand that proper, to deal with on that, the proper pre-project preparation and diagnostic work is essentially critical for charting out the reform options, determining the priorities and appropriate sequencing of activities. And as a part of the World Bank volume on customs modernization handbook, we did the comprehensive review of the revenue projects on revenue components over the 2 decades, 1982, 2002, using the comprehensive data set from IEG, Independent Evaluation Group, combined with the ICRs, the implementation completion reports, the IEG evaluation reports, and to some extent, the project status reports. And we found very strong link between the quality of diagnostics, design, and outcomes of our revenue operations. There was a significant correlation between the rating of the outcomes of revenue components and the two proxies of the quality at entry, specifically the quality of diagnostics and performance indicators. And the correlation came as a 5.4 and almost 0.7 respectively. And the results really reaffirm the chain of impact from the quality of the pre-project diagnostics to design to implementation. And yet, the revenue administrations, the operations that we have, lacked a substantive diagnosis with less than 40% of diagnostic categories being covered in tax operations. And at the time, the diagnostics, whenever done, was ad hoc and lacked a common methodological framework. And we and our IMF colleagues view that TADAT is really the flagship tool to help us fill this gap. And that leads to my really third point and the last point that I would like to mention in here. It is from my own experience and perspective, the TADAT came in as a standardized and effective tool to support our revenue operations. As the Jim and Justin have noted right from the beginning of the event, TADAT has proven highly relevant to our support in revenue administration reforms. And in here, I would like to bring in two specific country examples. One on the TADAT pilot in Madagascar, and the other one on Vietnam. In one country case, at the end of the TADAT mission, the most senior management of the revenue administration acknowledged that TADAT was really for them as the unique opportunity for their own comprehensive review of their own performance. The exercise really brought all the departments to sit together to, with like a targeted and cross assessment of tax administration, legal underpinnings, the business processes, and the enabling IT issues. And the TADAT at the time, the TADAT operation, the mission that we did was for the TADAT secretariat was, the pilot. So the diagnostic was serving the purpose of the pilot for the refining the tool, that is was for like the TADAT secretariat. But for us, for the World Bank and for the Minister of Finance, it really triggered the new round of dialogues and negotiation for the new PFM project with substantive tax administration component. And in the other country context, a couple of years after we done with like the TADAT, the assessment report was then used as the entry point for the bank fund collaboration to support the government in its effort to develop the new 10-year revenue reform strategy. Specifically, the fund used it to underpin its just-in-time situational scanning and identification of strengths and weaknesses in tax administration in the context of the country's evolving economic structure and deepening globalization. So here I would like to just highlight the two specific cases where the TADAT has impacted significantly and directly on furthering our main business lines and laying down the platform for collaboration among development partners at the country level. So let me stop here and over to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Tuan. This was very interesting to hear from your own experience working in TADAT at the beginning, and also some of the country examples you are referring to. So without further ado, let me turn to you, Natalia. You were also part of the seminal team working from the World Bank on the very first TADAT design. So let us hear if you have any additional high experience you would like also to share. And also it will be interesting to hear about your experience leading TADAT in East Europe and Central Asian countries in your previous capacity within the World Bank. Over to you, Natalia. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. It's a great pleasure to be part of this distinguished panel and to be back with colleagues with whom we worked so closely for quite a number of years. One point I would like to add to what Tuan mentioned about our collaboration with the International Monetary Fund from early days. The bank, I think, brought a very important perspective to discussions and to design of TADAT tool on accountability, as Tuan mentioned. But I would like to emphasize that particularly this perspective came from our early realization in tax administration modernization operations that engaging just with government stakeholders is just not enough to move the reform agenda in tax area forward. You need to engage with taxpayers. You really need to not just focus on taxpayer services to support voluntary compliance. You also need to emphasize the other side of accountability, is that tax administrations need to be transparent. They are not different from any other government institutions. They need to be transparent about their plans. They need to be transparent, at least to the extent that it, makes sense. It doesn't distort the balance about the performance and about results of various surveys that tax authorities either perform or contract out. And it's a very important dimension that then it feeds back into tax morale environment and encourages taxpayers to really understand why paying taxes is important. And so the whole reform environment then becomes more stable, and there is basically purpose for every stakeholder in this journey. So I think that was from the bank side that the insights that the team brought, and it got reflected in the design of the TADAT methodology. In terms of my experience as someone who led TADAT assessments, but also someone who was part of as a team member as well on other TADAT assessments, including the ones led by multi-donor teams. I would like to say that as Jim and Justin highlighted, the very important contribution that TADAT makes is it establishes a robust baseline of where tax administration performance is. It identifies not just strengths, but weaknesses, and I would emphasize gaps. That's what I think Justin alluded to, that there are really significant gaps, as we discover through these TADAT assessments in tax administrations. It helps to raise awareness among various stakeholders about the need for further tax reform, because quite often countries that requested TADAT assessment, they were in the midst of the reforms, and they realize that something is missing, and they need better information about how to design and properly sequence their tax reform, and doing TADAT assessment, and particularly by making it public, really helps to bring understanding to all stakeholders about the necessity and the way forward in moving with the tax reform. I would also like to say that in countries where I both led TADAT assessments and participated as a team member, this TADAT assessment really contributed to formulating comprehensive reform roadmap. And it affected not just tax administration, it had implications for tax policy. So that really gave a profound insight to tax authorities and, ministries of finance, if tax authorities are not part of the ministries of finance, to really have a clear direction, what they need to do, what performance areas they really need to improve, what international benchmarks and good practices they really need to aspire to achieve in order to really be considered a modern tax administration. And I would like to also particularly mention one country where I have been working for quite a while and where I led TADAT assessment is the Kyrgyz Republic. It's a small country in Central Asia. It's a very dynamic country. with very open civil society and quite active government. And they were implementing tax reforms, but they really felt the need to take an opportunity of the TADAT instrument when it became available and requested TADAT assessment. And when we very closely worked on this TADAT assessment, both the country authorities and the bank team really saw that it provides a very valuable information, an opportunity to really charter a new pathway for more robust tax reform. As a result of this TADAT assessment, which is actually public and available on the TADAT Secretariat website, together with authorities, the World Bank team crafted a very comprehensive reform program. And it basically is supported by several instruments. One of them is a lending operation that will help the tax authority to modernize business processes, upgrade IT, but there is also very important and very large technical assistance on operation executed by the bank and generously funded by our excellent partners, SECO, that really provides capacity building in very important areas such as compliance, risk management, taxpayer communication, education. It helps us to support authorities in identifying and implementing quick wins, which are really critical for sustaining reform agenda and enabling reform champions to have credible, basically something to show that while we are on this, medium-term journey to implement really big transformative reforms, we can deliver on results early on, and that's something that is very important to really sustain the reform process. So, in overall, I think TADAT, as all participants noted, is a very important tool that really proved itself to be incredibly valuable. And I am looking forward to opportunities to use TADAT assessment in countries in the region where I'm currently working in Middle East. We are right now working on undefined such countries which initially express interest. So that's something that is very exciting, and I think it's been a great pleasure to be able to contribute to this important agenda on behalf of the World Bank team. So I would like to thank Daniel also for the opportunity to share my experiences about working on TADAT and implementing TADAT assessment. Thank you, Daniel, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Natalia. A very interesting point you're raising from your wide experience now on TADAT. Thank you very much again for making yourself available. So let me just turn to you, Saidu. We know you are actually in the middle of a TADAT mission. So we know those missions get really, really busy. So thank you very much for taking these minutes to be with us. So without further ado, Saidu, we would also like to hear your particular insights and experience from in-country TADAT assessments. And also we would like to hear in particular if there is any particular country example you would like to showcase as an interesting experience. And of course, in your capacity of a regional point contact from the World Bank on TADAT in the African region, we would really like to hear how those TADAT has increased the policy dialogue with authorities and to inform back operations. Over to you, Saidu.
Sure. Thank you, Daniel. As you just mentioned, yeah, I'm in the final phase to complete a TADAT assessment here. But I would like maybe, first of all, to thank the organizer, the Global Tax team, and the audience for the opportunity given to share my own experience in conducting the TADAT assessment in Francophone countries in Africa, particularly. So I will provide some general observation based on my own experience, and also follow with some specific country example where the bank is providing some follow-up support to improve tax administration capacities. So over my last 6 years, I have been involved in TADAT assessments in almost 10 French-speaking countries. And my general observation will be grouped in 3 main aspects. First, I see TADAT as a tool for collaboration. This has already been mentioned. Second, TADAT as a catalyzer for tax reform. And third, TADAT as a tool for harmonization, especially in the regional context. So TADAT as a tool for collaboration. This has been mentioned by Jim and Justin. My own experience in TADAT assessment in Francophone countries has been a great opportunity to strengthen the collaboration between the bank and the IMF Fiscal Affairs Department and the TADAT Secretariat, but also with other partners like the CREDAF, which is an international association for tax administration authorities based in France, and also the regional organization, the West Africa Economic Monetary Union in Africa. So these exercises have allowed to strengthen our collaboration, and we are now thinking about organizing a regional TADAT workshop with the partners that I just mentioned. Second, TADAT also has been a tool for catalyzing tax reform, especially in the bank context. So inside the bank, TADAT has been a catalyzer to provide a comprehensive tax support to our client countries, both in terms of tax administration, but also in tax policy aspect. So the TADAT assessment conducted in West Africa Economic Monetary Union has been a necessary complement to the support that the bank was also providing at the same time on some tax policy aspect, like, for example, the review of tax gap analysis in WIME countries. It has been conducted by our MTIS colleagues, our macroeconomics colleagues. And this was an opportunity to also inform our budget support operation in those countries. And third, TADAT as a tool for harmonization. My general observation is that in tax administration in Francophone countries, they are facing the similar challenges that could be addressed in an harmonized way through regional guidance and rules. And I can classify these challenges as follows. The integrity of taxpayer register. I think that was also mentioned by Justin. In most cases, the tax information system does not allow the automation of some certain essential function of tax administration, like registration, declaration, tax audit, litigation, and tax collection. So most often we have, different module dealing with tax registry without a clear link with the module in charge of tax collection, etc. So this is one of the challenges. Second, the effective risk management. In most cases, those tax administration are lacking, a multi-year strategic plan to identify, assess, and mitigate the tax compliance risk, but also the risk linked to the human capital and operational risk, as the TADAT is thinking. So there is a need to support those countries to set up a risk management framework to better identify and address the tax compliance risk. And for example, no tax administration was prepared to face the COVID-19 challenge, because this is and have an impact on the operation of most of the tax administrations. Third, revenue accounting system. And in most cases, the tax administration does not have an automated accounting system that ensure that the control and completeness of recording of tax revenues, and that interfaces clearly with the Ministry of Finance revenue accounting system. So we have a disconnect between the accounting system or the registry system and the overall Ministry of Finance accounting system. This is an issue. And last point that I want to mention is about the internal audit and external control of tax administration. And in most cases also, the operational and financial activities of tax administration are not subject to the external audits of the Supreme Audit Institution and these are the general observation that I wanted to mention here. Now, in terms of specific country example, I will focus on West Africa Economic Monetary Union. The region has set the minimum tax to GDP ratio for the member countries at 20%. But most of those countries are below this target. And based on this challenge, and also in consideration of the Addis tax initiative and the bank also AIDA commitment to support domestic revenue mobilization, the bank, we engage in our client countries to provide some support. Currently, we are preparing 3 P4 operation, program for result operation for Côte d'Ivoire, for Benin and Togo, where we conducted TADAT assessment, and we have a specific component that will deal with domestic revenue mobilization. And in Togo, for example, we support the country to set up the tax policy unit, even if this is not about tax administration, but it's the TADAT assessment show that there is a need to really have an independent entity that will define the tax policy and that will be implemented by the tax administration. So we support to set up this tax policy unit. We also support the automation of the cross-checking of taxpayer return for VAT and the custom declaration. Because this was not something that was not in place before the TADAT, but based on the result of the TADAT, we try to improve the interconnection between the tax administration system and then the custom administration system. We also support the transparency in the publication of strategic documents. This, the tax authority they were preparing those documents, but they're not making them public. So based on the TADAT result, now some countries are making public the strategic document. In Cameroon, for example, also after the TADAT, we supported the tax administration in the geolocalization initiative to improve property tax collection. Although property tax is not part of the core tax considered by the TADAT, but it was also an opportunity to expand the support that we could provide to leverage tax collection in the tax administration. So geolocalization was also a tool that the bank supported to implement in order to increase property tax in the country. And one last point that I want to also mention is, as we know, after the COVID, in the context of the COVID, most of the tax administration try to digitalize their process, either in terms of tax declaration and tax payment. But this new environment also raised some risk And we are working with some tax administration to try to see how we could address the risk related to cyber security. Since payment are now being made, by digital processes, and some of them are not prepared, for cyber security risk. So this is something that we in an area where we are trying to support them. Also, the protection of personal data. Personal data protection is also an area that where we think that there is a need to support the country, the tax administration, in the context of the digitalization of the process. So, and finally, I'll give an example for DRC, where we support, the tax administration to set up the control and audit function. And we provide some training on risk-based auditing methodology in order to strengthen the capacity of tax auditor. So we have a lot of examples, but for the sake of time, I will stop here and will be available to provide any response to any additional question. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Seydou. Thank you very much. Indeed, a very rich inventory of substantial World Bank experience in the Africa region with TADAT. So thank you very much to all. We are running a little bit late of time. So without further ado, let me turn to my colleague, Jaren, who will be monitoring and who will be leading the panel, the second panel of this morning. Will focusing on the stakeholders' perspective in terms of real life experience with TADAT. Over to you, Jaren.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you all colleagues who have spoken so far for the very insightful interventions. This has been wonderful. Our second panel will focus on stakeholders' perspectives and their real-life practical experiences with TADAT. We have an extremely distinguished panel, Mr. Carlos Vargas Duran, General Director for Taxation, Ministry of Finance for Costa Rica. Mrs. Monica Caligiuri, she is a Lead Tax Administration Specialist with the Inter-American Development Bank. And Mr. Carlos Orejales, Economist and Program Manager for the State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, SECO, Switzerland. I'll start with you, Mr. Carlos Vargas. Costa Rica undertook a TADAT assessment in 2019, supported by the IMF, World Bank, SIAT, and Inter-American Development Bank. What was your experience hosting a TADAT mission, a multi-agency TADAT mission? How the results of the assessment have helped your tax administration to improve performance areas? What are some insights after 2 years? Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Vargas. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Muy buenos días a todos los que nos acompañan. Bueno, muy buenas en realidad se debe decir ahora, porque no sabemos a qué hora están todos los que en estos medios virtuales nos acompañan. Gracias por la participación, por hacer posible la participación nuestra en esta actividad. Realmente es muy interesante escuchar cómo fue evolucionando el TADAT a lo largo del tiempo por parte de los diferentes organismos internacionales que han participado en su evolución. En el caso nuestro, pues solicitamos efectivamente la realización de la evaluación TADAT en el 2018. Estábamos en el marco de la discusión de una reforma fiscal de muy largo alcance que tenía el país en ese momento, la cual fue aprobada al finalizar ese año. Y bueno, la evaluación nos ha permitido o nos permitió pues no solo conocer dónde estamos, sino dónde estamos en relación con las mejores prácticas, ¿verdad? Me parece que eso es lo más relevante. Y ver de qué manera nosotros podemos, dentro de la planificación que llevamos adelante, de la gestión de la administración cada año, ir incorporando ya como una labor permanente de parte de la administración las acciones de mejora tendientes a solventar las áreas donde pues tenemos que fortalecer nuestra gestión en atención a la evaluación. Igual teníamos algunas áreas que no estaban o no se encontraban tan mal, pero bueno, en estas lo importante es pues mantener y mejorar lo que ya tenemos, de manera que pues al tener un parámetro de referencia con el cual compararnos y no solo con nuestra realidad ya existente, la evaluación TADAT pues nos ha permitido ir buscando opciones de mejora significativas en la gestión. Esto pues sin lugar a dudas se refleja también en los indicadores, en la mejora de la brecha de omisos, por ejemplo, dado que nos ha permitido emprender a partir del análisis de la información disponible, la toma de acciones sobre una base de conocimiento, ¿verdad? O sea, a partir del análisis de la información, hemos adoptado medidas que hemos llamado estructurales, es decir, ajustes normativos, ajustes ya no tanto legales, porque la reforma se aprobó en el 2018, sino ajustes en la normativa infralegal que nos permita ir cerrando ese tipo de brechas. Durante este año aplicamos una serie de medidas que nos ha permitido pues, mejorar significativamente la brecha de omisos, ¿verdad? Y de presentación en tiempo de las declaraciones. Esto solo para dar un ejemplo. De la mano con esto, igual, pues hemos venido trabajando con el Fondo Monetario, con el Departamento de Asuntos Fiscales y con el apoyo de el Centro Regional del Fondo Monetario y el apoyo del BID y del Banco Mundial en diferentes momentos, en lo que tiene que ver con el diseño de un plan de mejora de cumplimiento tributario, de la gestión tributaria del país, donde pues lo que buscamos es a partir de, nuevamente, de la realización de análisis de entorno de todo el sistema económico costarricense, cuáles son las mejores acciones que nosotros podemos adoptar para ir logrando el mejor cumplimiento voluntario de parte de los contribuyentes. Ya sea que adoptemos medidas correctivas, es decir, fiscalizaciones intensivas o masivas, o acciones preventivas mediante la utilización de mecanismos de economía conductual en los cuales el Banco Mundial pues, nos ha colaborado en su diseño durante los últimos años de manera muy efectiva y muy positiva. Entonces, esto viene, digamos, a conjuntarse en una serie de acciones que nos han permitido pues, ir midiendo cómo vamos evolucionando en el tema de los indicadores de gestión de la administración como un todo. Adicionalmente, pues hemos emprendimos en su momento la capacitación y la certificación de algunos compañeros en la metodología de evaluación TADAT, ¿verdad? Esto pues no solo para efectos de que ellos puedan eventualmente ser considerados en algún proceso de este tipo, sino sobre todo pensando en que ellos mismos pues nos ayuden a autoevaluarnos en relación con estos indicadores, con lo cual pues estamos tratando de llevar un seguimiento más continuo de esta metodología. Finalmente, pues la reforma del 2018 llegó en un momento en que estábamos masificando la utilización de la factura electrónica y pues recientemente entonces lo que hemos hecho es fortalecer o tratar de fortalecer de la mano y con el apoyo del BID todo lo que es la analítica de datos para este tema de factura electrónica, de manera que dentro de los procesos de gestión de riesgos de cumplimiento, que también están contemplados o considerados en el plan de mejora de cumplimiento, podamos tener una gestión ya no dividida por áreas funcionales, como venía trabajando la administración durante los últimos 30 años, sino en una gestión por procesos que nos permita ir abarcando o abordando la gestión tributaria en función de la reducción de las diferentes brechas, ¿verdad?, de cumplimiento que existen y que nosotros pues debemos abordar. De manera que la gestión de la administración, pues desde este punto de vista, nosotros esperamos o tenemos la expectativa de que sea de una manera más integrada, ¿verdad? Ya no focalizada en la función propia y separada de cada una de las áreas, sino en función al cumplimiento de una meta global que tiene relación con el abordaje de este tipo de brechas. De manera que, pues efectivamente, la evaluación TADAT, desde ese punto de vista, nos ha permitido y nos sigue permitiendo, pues, ir evolucionando en la mejora de los indicadores y las áreas operativas que pues involucra la evaluación, pero no solo por la evaluación en sí mismo, sino por la mejora en la gestión que nosotros esperamos de parte de la administración. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mr. Carlos Vargas. This was an excellent intervention, a lot of valuable insight. Now, I turn to Monica from Inter-American Development Bank. Monica, what is, in your view, the value of having TADAT assessment teams integrated from assessors of different organizations, including the World Bank? What has been your experience working on TADAT in this multi-organizational environment? And I'll add one mini question as well. If you'd like to add any insights of working together in COVID context, for example, if you feel that there are differences between field missions versus virtual missions, that Justin also gave us a little bit of a sense that have started as an innovation with the COVID challenges. Thank you. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Sarah. It's well, and good morning, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon. It's a pleasure participating in this panel now with also Carlos Vargas and Carlos Ojales, and share our experience from the IDB. My first TADAT assessment happened in 2016, now in Dominican Republic. And it was a team comprised of IMF, World Bank, TADAT Secretariat, USA Treasurer, and also the IDB. I was working at TADAT Secretariat at that time. It was a great experience for all of us and also for the country, having these professionals working together now with the same goal now in the country. And since at that time, I could participate directly or indirectly in several assessments in Latin America and the Caribbean region, and where we work here. And I'm very glad that the IDB has been supporting TADAT assessments now in the region, whether national or subnational. In Brazil, we already participate in 6 assessments, and we are going to the 7th this month, November, and we have another one already scheduled. And but talking about the value of having a hybrid team, tax administration normally use the TADAT results, as Mr. Carlos Vargas has shared with us, to prepare their strategic plan, initiate the reforms, and also request laws, and support from developing partners. And then these reports, when they come from an independent assessment team that reflects the real situation, now it's valid for the country and for the objectives they have. In addition, when we are conducting an assessment or also trainings, as Justin has mentioned, we can share now the experience, all this rich experience we have in the fielding or working tax administration or working for the governments, and also the experience in these developing partners. It's great having these interactions. And And sometimes what happens is the results of an assessment are not always good news for the general director. But when they receive the results from a solid and independent team, now it makes all the difference, in my opinion. And thinking about an economic perspective, the cost of carrying out an assessment, if shared among organizations, allows them to participate in more than 1 or 2 assessments in a year. And it's great. Frequently, those organizations are working together or developing projects in the same country. From a government perspective, when they receive a team comprised of members from organizations that work in the country, they perceive the importance of this activity. And also, the government can provide information or explanation data for all the organizations at the same time. And it avoids costs for both government and organization to carry out different diagnostics mission. And other things that I think that's important, when hybrid teams or these professionals in the same country working together for 2 or 3 weeks, it enlarges the network and establish this friendship. And also it facilitates the dialogue among the organization. I think it's a great value these hybrid teams for TADAT assessment. And Justin has mentioned the assessment that we had in Colombia last year, in the middle of the pandemic. And it was very interesting because it was the first one that we had in this virtual way that we are working right now. But this assessment was very challenging. And Catherine Bayer was the leader of this, the team leader. And she handled perfectly this mission. But we know the assessment is evidence-based. And what happened is providing this evidence in the middle of the pandemic was not easy for the tax official because they are working from home. The files was not in their computers. They couldn't go to the tax administration premises to get the evidence. Then we had from the IDB someone work in the field, and this person could help us to gather the evidence that we need to complete this assessment. At the end, everything went very well, and I think that's why it's important having a solid team now working with this TADAT assessment. Sometimes people think that it's not necessary to send a very experienced professional to this TADAT assessment, but it is because not everything is in the script, and the situations happen and needs to be solved very, very quickly in the field. And also in this virtual assessment, that's more difficult and challenging. And just to complete, because we know that we are running now out the time, and my humble opinion, talking about online missions and comparing with these face-to-face missions. Of course, online missions are cost-effective, and it is also very beneficial not only for trainings, but what happens is that we miss the human contact, this interaction that's important to establish confidence. And just to finish, I hope that we can resume the face-to-face missions very soon. And I hope to continue working together and having these great results that Justin has presented to us. Now it's a very, very good presentation, and also from the others the experience and all these insightful insightful comments that we received in this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Monica, for these extremely valuable perspectives, practical experiences, and also the insights on working in the COVID context and the challenges that came with that. Very much agreed. Now turning to our colleague, Mr. Carlos Orjales from SECO. Carlos, you have been involved on the TADAT initiative from its very early stages as a representative of a key partner institution, SECO. From this perspective, how you see TADAT today compared to the very early days and its envisioned objectives? Are there some lessons learned? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me, for inviting a small, modest bilateral donor to also explain why the TADAT is so important. And as you mentioned, Sharon, I had the opportunity to be involved in the TADAT since the beginning, 10 or 11 years ago. So I think, yes, I can share a bit of my experience and tell you a bit how things changed so substantially from the situation we had 10 years ago. So perhaps, so to better understand why it's useful for a bilateral donor, let me tell you a bit, present ourselves. So I'm part of SECO, which is the Ministry of Economy, to make it simple, of Switzerland. We are in a division which is in charge of the economic cooperation. So what we do basically is we implement bilateral programs, technical assistance programs, and this is half of our budget, and the rest goes to global initiatives such as precisely the Global Tax Initiative of the World Bank, the Revenue Mobilization Trust Fund of the IMF, OECD Inclusive Framework, any of these global initiatives which have the objective of contributing to the DRM agenda, the Domestic Resource Mobilization Agenda. So that's what we do. We invest a substantial part of our money to strengthen tax administrations. And we are doing that for quite a long time. In the 80s already, SECO was supporting tax administrations. I remember that at that time, I was not there, but I heard my old colleagues that it was sometimes difficult to explain to people why we are helping tax administrations. They often told us, but you should build schools or hospitals, but why increase pressure on taxpayers in countries that do not necessarily have the capacity? But we say, look, without strong tax administration, I mean, you can do anything you want to build hospitals, you will not have the sustainability. So it's very important. It's at the core, it's the DNA of our cooperation in Switzerland is first, you have to build the macroeconomic backbone. You have to have strong central banks that are able to really manage their monetary policy. You must have strong ministries of finance that are able to spend the money efficiently. You need to have, of course, tax administrations that collect taxes efficiently and fairly. And for that reason, for us, it has always been quite difficult because we were trying to help the countries, but we were not having, a tool that allows us quickly, rapidly to have an understanding of where do we are, what are the main deficiencies in the tax administrations. As you know, the tax administrations are very complex animals, I would say. They have to face very challenging situations. The international context, often very complex regulation and laws, the involvement of the judiciary system also, that not necessarily understand the needs of a tax administration. So it's a very complex environment, and we don't have a tool, to really quickly have an understanding of the major deficiencies and what should be done. And the TADAT is really good because as the PIFA, it's something that is not too long. It's because we could really write 400 pages if we want to describe any of the areas for tax administration and the difficulties and perhaps what could be the solutions. I mean, even more than 400 pages. And we don't have time for that. We really need something that gives us a clear, an instantaneous picture of where we stand and covering all the areas, all the functions, but not going in too much details, really focusing on the outcome, on the result. You know, are you achieving the results or not? Independently of the way, the path you decide to take, do you meet the targets at the end of the journey? And the TADAT is doing that very efficiently because you just send a couple of TADAT assessors, a couple of weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks maximum, and you get this assessment done. So this is really important for us as a bilateral donor where we have to build a program, but we need this overview at the beginning, and we can do it quite rapidly. And then perhaps what is particularly interesting in the TADAT, I think, and it's similar to the PIFA, but I think even for TADAT is even more, that it allows us to start a dialogue with the authorities on a reform, on a medium-term reform. Because for those who already work with tax administration, you know that tax administrations are often many things to do, and it must be done yesterday, that don't have resources, and you ask them, to think about reforms on the longer term. And this is not easy. Often, the decision makers, they want solutions now to increase the budget, the revenues now, to meet the revenue targets. And that's the support, the political support that the tax administration has. But if you want to have a longer term support over years to really build your infrastructure, to train your people, then it's more difficult to secure this political buy-in. And with the TADAT, you can show that to the decision makers and tell them, look, that's where we are. We have some low-hanging fruits here. We can, do some quick reform and get fruits. But if we want really to improve things sustainably and have an impact, then you need to invest over 2, 3 or more years. If we talk, for example, for voluntary compliance, you may invest, for example, a generation trying to explain people why they should pay taxes. So there are different types of reforms that take different moments, but the TADAT has the merit to provide this overview, and at the end to have political backing for more time, which is absolutely necessary. Without the involvement of strong champions, of strong decision makers, you cannot really improve the situation of a tax administration. I will say fairly and sustainably, because short-term measures are always, tax more the ones that are already registered. But undertaking new efforts to, find the new taxpayers, change legislations, well, this is not always easy. So perhaps a last positive thing of the TADAT that was not necessarily mentioned today, but for us is so crucial, is that TADAT allows for a real operational coordination among multilateral and bilateral donors also. We have very interesting and important initiatives such as the Platform for Cooperation on Tax, which also aims at increasing coordination among the big providers of aid in this area, IMF, World Bank, OECD, UN. But then at the operational level, we often see teams that work, doing their own business without really looking at what the others do. And for us, since we are, contributing to the World Bank programs, to the IMF programs, to other organizations such as CIAT, for example, or the OECD, we have also an interest that these people work together. And this does not mean that they have to use the same tools, they have different mandates, different ways to work together, but at least, they are pulling at the same rope. And that's not always the case. Let me give you an anecdote that I like to share sometimes to explain the problems of coordination sometimes. In one country, we had a team of an organization which was trying to improve, to simplify tax, to reduce the burden for taxpayers, and that was really good, so they were telling to tax administration, well, you have to reduce the burden, you have to ask less information, and so on. And at the same time, you had another organization which was pushing about tax transparency, and that was telling, no, you have to increase, you have to ask more documents to the taxpayers. So at least the tax administration said, you have two organizations, one is telling me to simplify, the other is telling me to make it more complex. So that's exactly the type of things that we can avoid by having them working, together. And I think, I don't know the other areas, but I think that it's the first time that we have missions where you have one people from the IMF, one from the World Bank, from the IADB, one other from the CIAT, and perhaps two bilateral donors. And that's really incredible. That's really what I call effective operational coordination. Because after the TADAT, they may do different things. Some provide loans, some technical assistance from headquarters or from the field, but at least we have a common understanding and we are pushing all the same rope. So for us, TADAT is certainly a very successful story. I think much has been done by launching this TADAT, and in all modesty, I think Switzerland play also an important role together with my colleague from other donor agencies by really having this secretariat established and now the methodology being acknowledged worldwide. Perhaps a last word, I would say that yes, that's great what we did, and that's great what we achieved, but it's only the beginning. And I will to echo what Justin said, the journey is still long, because now we are struggling for the next step, I will say, in the TRM agenda is really to establishing these medium-term revenue strategies. And I think that's the next. A lot has been done already, but I think that we have to put more and more efforts now to, what we did, what do we do after we have the TADAT? How we ensure that we have commitment for 5-10 years for a really comprehensive reform in the tax administration. And here, I think that we are still many things to do together because if we reach this MTRS and establish like a gold standard for conducting a medium-term reform strategy, then we will have achieved a very important things for development for our countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlos. Extremely rich insights, and I thank you for bringing it back to the medium-term revenue strategies as well, so that made our webinar even richer. It's a very important point. Thank you for that. Colleagues, we have had a very active Q&A interaction through the Zoom's function. I see that all the excellent questions that you posed as participants have been answered by my colleagues. For this reason, I will skip the Q&A because we're quite over time, and I will hand over to our webinar's chair, to Mrs. Chiara Bronchi, to have her concluding remarks. Again, I thank this distinguished panelists for their excellent remarks, and over to you, Chiara. Thank you.
So thank you very much to all the panelists, the participants, and also to my colleagues that have made this event possible. And there are also many that have worked behind the scene to ensure that everything was working smoothly. They could not control the weather in my country, but that's beyond, it's the externality. So let me just say a few things. A lot was said, and I think I come away from this seminar with reinforced in the thinking and belief that TADAT is a strong instrument, is really being, as I was saying earlier, internalized. It was also interesting to hear that some tax administration are using the parameters of TADAT as part of their performance assessments. It's also spurring innovation. And I heard also our friends from Switzerland, friends and also supporters. It's probably is one of those instruments or methodology that have also been raised the bar in terms of multilateral developments and development partners coordination, not just at the central level, but also at the country level. So I think it's, I also learned a lot about obviously there is a lot that needs to be done still, and the fact that we need to be patient, and this type of reforms take time. Tax administration is a behavioral change, it's a long-term transformation, but that helps us really to nail down and to assess the gaps and to set the steps and roadmaps to move forward. It helps the tax administrations in particular. I think it was particularly refreshing also to hear the experiences from Latin America. So thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. With this, I think I want to thank you all, and I think we will call it to a closure, but I look forward to more of these events and also to continue to analyze the findings. I think there were some very interesting questions that deserve to be answered, in particular the correlation between revenue mobilization and strengthening of tax administration. That's something that is close to certainly all us in terms of work, professional engagement, and overall development objectives. So with this, thank you very much, Danielle, Jeren, Jim, and all of you who participated today, and have a good day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues.